I'm Carlos Greer, senior reporter at Page Six, and it's the end of the first week of Sean Diddy Combs' trial, and like so many of you, I've got questions. Here to break down what happened in the courtroom this week is entertainment lawyer, former litigator, and legal correspondent Lisa Bonner. Lisa, how are you doing, my friend?
I am well, Carlos. How are you?
I am doing well. Needless to say, it's been an explosive week for Diddy's trial. Cassie testified, and we got a real glimpse into their very dark and violent world she was living in from her mouth. But she's not on trial. Diddy is. And there are too many headlines to keep up with, frankly. So before we dive in, remind us how Diddy got here. What are the charges that he's facing?
The defendant is facing several charges. The defendant is facing a RICO charge. He is also facing the sex trafficking and the transportation of individuals for the purposes of prostitution. This was all framed under a RICO statute as well. So I think it's important, and we'll get into that and how that works. But that is the nutshell of the case.
Well, tell me, how does that work?
Basically, what the SDNY is trying to establish is that the event, and I'm going to read directly from the indictment, so to be clear, the defendant abused, threatened, and coerced women and others around him to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. To do so, Combs relied on the employees, resources, and influences of the business empire that he led and controlled, creating a criminal enterprise whose members and associates engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other crimes, sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. And they are bringing this through a RICO case. And the way the RICO case is generally brought is, I like to talk about a RICO like a funnel, right? A RICO, generally, you charge as many people as you can to get to the mob boss, the crime boss, the John Gotti's, if you will. But it's important to remember in a federal case that they don't need to disclose who their witnesses are going to be, who anybody who is going to testify is going to be. That can be kept under seal. That's why there's so much anticipation and questions over who, what, why, when, who's next, what are they going to say, all of the things. So basically what they're saying is that the RICO, the enterprise, existed for the purposes of Combs and other members and associates of the Combs enterprise to engage in these unlawful acts of violence, sex trafficking, forced labors, right? And securing absolute loyalty from the members of the Combs enterprise through acts of violence and through threats.
So this is so much bigger than Cassie, which everyone has been focusing on this week.
It has very little to do with Cassie. Cassie is one of many people that the feds are going to come forth and proffer this, this information, this testimony, this witness of how this RICO and how this criminal enterprise worked. Dawn Richard is supposedly next up on the stand. The members of Danity Kane. There are a lot of people who are going to come forward that we believe are going to come forward and testify. Cassie went on probably as the first witness, one, because she is the star witness, but also she is 8.5 months pregnant. So when you were listening to the prosecution's opening statement, they said, we're going to paint a picture of all of this, and that might not be linear, but you're going to understand how this works. So they put Cassie, because literally her testimony had to be finished today because she is 8.5 months pregnant and can go into labor at any time. At that point, if she were to go to labor on the stand, that could immediately cause a mistrial for the prosecution.
Right, so essentially they're setting it up.
Correct. They are laying just a bit of the groundwork. Week one of potentially an 8-month trial. So an 8-week trial. So we've got 7 weeks essentially to go.
Right. So you've been following this trial very closely. And, as you mentioned, we heard from Cassie, who gave an explosive testimony. What's your reaction to the first week, and what stood out to you?
Well, what stood out to me was Cassie's very graphic testimony, which both of them acknowledged was, Diddy acknowledged in his people in his opening statement, his defense attorneys established that, listen, he was abusive, he was violent, but his violence don't amount to crimes. That's what they said in the opening statement. But in the prosecution's opening statement, they said he was violent, and the sexual violence and the domestic violence is just part and parcel to this RICO charge. So they are right now just laying out the elements. Cassie showed you how allegedly he took away her agency. She was forced, she was coerced. Sure, she had some participation in the freak offs, but at what point is her consent removed? And that's what we're looking for. We're not looking at each individual time. You're looking at the totality of the circumstances. Overall, looking at this 19-year-old girl, he was 37 when they got involved, almost twice her age. Did this man remove her agency? Did she feel like she had free will to leave? And they are establishing times when she tried to leave. The video established she tried to leave. He brought her back. She tried to leave. Some gentleman came next to me and sat on the plane and showed me an iPad full of tapes from the freak offs. You know, people he sent to bring her back. Some of his associates, employees, people that work for him were sent when she would leave. She repeatedly established that she tried to leave, and he would bring her back. You're not looking at the 19-year-old girl now on the stand. You're looking at a 38-year-old woman who has been through therapy, through trauma therapy, to try and deal with what she has gone through. And we can talk about that later and how that factors into the case. Yeah. But it's very important.
And I would imagine that you're probably going to hear a lot of this from whomever takes the stand in the upcoming weeks as well. But this is a very serious case, obviously, and Diddy, he is facing life in prison. What is the strategy? What did you notice about the defense's strategy?
Well, the defense's strategy is she always had consent. You know, she was there as a willing participant. She was jealous. Diddy was on drugs. You know, they're using that to poke holes in his state of mind. It doesn't matter if you're on drugs and you commit a crime. It doesn't matter. So they are throwing a lot of red herrings. I mean, they're trying to do the best with what they have. But one thing that people need to understand about federal cases and the SDNY in particular, generally when the feds come to you, they have a case. Yeah. They have a case. The SDNY has over a 95% conviction rate, and they are the largest and most powerful district court in the country. The borough of Manhattan, the financial centers are all within the jurisdiction of the SDNY. They have plenty of evidence and plenty of experience in prosecuting RICO cases, sex trafficking, and these kidnapping and arson cases. This is a very serious case. And it's also important to remember that Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, all of these prior defendants were convicted of the same thing. Yeah. Some in state court and some in federal court. But the only thing the difference is the state of mind. State court has a lower presumption and a burden of proof.
Right. So what are your thoughts on how the prosecution is arguing their case?
I think that they are, again, we talked about them just laying out just step one of their star witness and really establishing the fact that she did not have free will. She was not really overall consenting. And what people are saying, well, she stayed. That really is not the correct way to look at a case like this. What you are doing is, what did he allegedly do to make her think that she did not have the ability to leave?